Okay, showing you where to get started with Marvel, and I'm going to start showing you where to get started with reading Iron Fist. Particularly, I would say that you start with the first issues, and they're collected both in Masterworks, volumes 1 and 2. But these have become incredibly expensive. They were already expensive on release, and there's a shorter paperback epic collection called The Fury of Iron Fist that collects the same issues. But I have the special hardcovers with so I don't plan on trading because these are nicer volumes. If you want to know what the story is, the first few issues really are the weakest Iron Fist issues. And the first season of the show was really based on the first few issues where Danny Rand returns to New York and he starts scaling up the Rand Tower to confront Harold Meacham. First issue was created by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. Roy Thomas, very famous for his Avengers run. Gil Kane has done a lot of comics work over the years, also almost as legendary of a name. And the issues later get written by Larry Hama and Tony Isabella. But at the same time, where these issues really take off, and Len Wein, the late Len Wein, who also was the same man who created Wolverine, that introduced a few characters. For instance, the Scythe character from Season 1 of Iron Fist was also present in here. But where things get good is once you reach Marvel Premiere 23. Where Chris Claremont takes over. And penciler for the first two issues that he does is Pat Broderick, where he starts off fighting Warhawk, who later on becomes more of an enemy of Luke Cage and Colossus than he does an Iron Fist enemy. And his facial features are a lot different when Pat Broderick draws him. They're also a lot less blocky than later Warhawk appearances, which I think is interesting. But yeah, the first few issues still really introduce Colleen Wing and Misty Knight. And when Chris Claremont is aboard, what happens is that Master Khan gets introduced as the man who actually killed Harold Meacham. Things play out very differently in the early Iron Fist days, because what happens is that Harold Meacham is actually assassinated by a ninja who is working for a guy called Master Khan. Of course, there's the fact that I think they went with a different direction where Ward was the guy to kill Harold, and he didn't frame Danny for anything. But I think that a big part of that is the fact that there's already enough like hand ninjas in there, but at the same time, if you throw a ninja in there, it would have to be a hand, and if they brought Master Khan in, there would be the question if the hand are Japanese, but Master Khan is Indian, and the ninja in the actual comics didn't actually have anything to do with the hand. If the story were redone today, he likely would, but at the same time, there's a question of Master Khan and a ninja, and Japanese and Indian cultures are not the same. Although, first season of Iron Fist really did mess up the hand by making them less distinctively Japanese, and I think that was a horrible mistake, since the hand ultimately are grounded in Japanese culture, but that's just my opinion, and on the first season of Iron Fist, and the first few issues really tell that story. But when Chris Claremont takes over, things start to get really good. They really start to pick up. John Byrne is possibly the greatest comic artist of all time. Starts with Marvel Premiere 25. And the character was a big enough hit that he eventually got his own series. Where John Byrne really draws emotions better than anybody else, where after one issue of John Byrne on art, Iron Fist's own title got greenlit. And this was back in the 70s when Claremont and Byrne were young men who were really starting out in comics, and issue 1 is also where Davos first appears. And Chris Claremont inherited the Misty Knight and Colleen Wing characters, and he did a very good job with them, actually. Chris Claremont is always, for a male writer, he's always written women very well, whereas I think a lot of male writers really struggle to write female characters. So Misty and Colleen have always been some of my favorites, precisely because of Chris Claremont, and yeah, just like the Iron Fist TV show, the first season was pretty weak. The issues before Chris Claremont took over aren't particularly strong either. They're written by some very big creators, but Chris Claremont is really where things get good, just like how season 2 of Iron Fist is where the show got good. And yeah, this is a really classic John Byrne panel right here. They travel to rescue the Princess of Halwan, which isn't a name that sounds Arabic at all, but it's literally from the Middle East. It's a fictional country, obviously. Because, quite frankly, back in the 70s, you could really blend Asian cultures together in ways that I don't think you can now. And when you look at the early Iron Fist issues, a lot of the imagery really does overlap with Orientalism in ways that I don't think you could really manage to depict those same cultures that way today. At least not really since the 90s. That was really the last time, and even then back in the 90s, that type of imagery was on its way out. So you have more stuff. Is this the Radion one? This guy isn't Radion. He's Ravager. Who is Ravager is in it. One guy with some atomic powers, but then there's a second guy with them called Radion, who's a much cooler villain who I hope will one day appear on the the next issue has Radion. And he is... Oh, never mind. Ravager is Radion. He just gets his name changed. Claremont also managed to bring in issues which are topical at the time, namely the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Character who shows up, and it turns out that he fled Northern Ireland. His buddies want to silence him, but he detonated some bombs over in the UK, and becomes a little bit of a moral conundrum for Danny, but the Troubles really ended with the Good Friday Agreement, so it's unlikely that that plot we picked up, that's a little bit dated, but it's a good read, just from the time it was written. Let's see. What happens is that Davos first appeared in issue 1. Much like season 2, Joy really did hire Davos to try to kill Danny and work with him. But yeah, the first 2 seasons are really based on what would be collected in either the first epic or the first 2 Masterworks volumes. Well, actually, they're the only Masterworks volumes, because after that, Iron Fist just does a few mini-series. And then there's Immortal Iron Fist, so... you have a lot of these characters over here. The Golden Tigers, who do feature an Iron Fist Season 2. Season 2 is very, very, very heavily based on the Claremont Byrne run. If you liked Iron Fist Season 2, I would recommend reading the Chris Claremont and John Byrne run. The Golden Tigers naturally don't dress like this on the TV show because their costumes are a little bit ridiculous. Too comic booky for live action. And, yeah. Yeah, Colleen is a pretty cool character. You meet her father, Lee Wing, in these issues, but Lee, he doesn't appear in the series. I think he'll probably appear in Season 3 if the show gets renewed. Because Season 2 is a big step up from Season 1. Like, Season 1 was pretty bad, but Season 2 was a really big step up. And, I think that those parallels with the comics were the first few issues being pretty weak, and then after Harold Meacham dies, Chris Claremont takes over and writes the ship, and that actually really worked. In the same way I think that Raven Metzner managed to fix Scott Buck's mess. That I had the highest jump ever recorded in between Rotten Tomato scores, so hopefully it's a sign the show is really improving and that it gets renewed, because people did watch the first season. I hope that people watch the second, because it was a big step up. And then what happens at the end is Danny and Davos get into a fight in Central Park, which happened in Season 1 of the show. In Season 2 it happens in a warehouse, because they just had to move the location for redundancy reasons. But before that happens, one character gets introduced in here who plays a very big role in the X-Men, namely Sabretooth. He was originally introduced as an arms dealer rather than a lot of his later characterization. Obviously, because Mr. Sinister wasn't created yet, he's not working for him. He wasn't a part of the Marauders. And he doesn't have any real ties to Wolverine yet. So without those Wolverine and Mr. Sinister and Gambit ties, especially since Gambit was introduced in 1989 or 1990. And then yeah, and the last issue of Iron Fist has him fighting the X-Men, with Davos as a recurring antagonist. Really good pictures here of Misty Knight in bikini, and then Misty Knight dressed up a bit more in what passed for business casual in the 1970s. And yeah, now you have Wolverine in here. No, Wolverine and Sabretooth don't meet yet. Not until very late in Chris Claremont's X-Men run. That's the thing I like more about old Marvel. And like, current DC still give people big long runs. Current Marvel, not really. I think they occasionally will. But then, you have the last two issues are on Marvel Team Up to conclude the story because the title got canceled. Where Danny will defeat Davos once and for all. And Davos becomes the Steel Serpent. What happens is that after these issues, because Iron Fist was canceled, but Marvel wanted the character to continue, they decided to make him Luke Cage's sidekick in Power Man and Iron Fist, and you can collect that in Power Man and Iron Fist Epic Collections 1 and 2, but just as a warning, those are really Luke Cage stories, and Luke Cage is only available on Masterworks, and if you don't have the money for that, I wouldn't recommend reading them. But that's what happens with the fact that they decided to make him the protagonist of a more popular, or made him the sidekick of a more popular hero, but also somebody who was a bit newer and less established, because I thought that would help sell Luke Cage a bit better to make Iron Fist his buddy, and it worked. And Luke, Danny, Misty, and Colleen became the Heroes for Hire. They got a good series in the 1990s, a Heroes for Hire series. I don't have that yet, but it did get collected. And I think it's still affordable. And here's the Immortal Iron Fist, which is where you should pick up again. There were some Iron Fist miniseries that are collected in another collection, but I don't have that because the stories aren't necessarily that well regarded. But Immortal Iron Fist was where things really got good, and there were hints that this is where they're taking the show in season 3. Assuming it gets renewed. Right at the very end, they mention the character Orson Randall, who plays a part in the first arc. Volume 1 of this is by Ed Brubaker, Matt Fraction, and David Ah. Is it pronounced Aha or Aja? I don't know how to pronounce it because I'm just not sure what his actual background is, what his actual ethnic background is. But the Fraction Brubaker issues are a lot of fun. The John Byrne art was great, but the new art, David's art, is really great here, especially with panels like this. The Hydra are actually involved. I'm not sure if they'll be involved in the TV show because they're more tied up with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but assuming that they can figure something out, they can bring him back. Orson Randall was a World War I veteran who's been alive and been the Iron Fist for a very long time. And here's a picture of Orson in his costume. He was likely the 1948 Iron Fist from the Chinese Civil War. I think that it's likely that he'll show up and that we'll get to see some more of Orson Randall. Now, what we have next is Steel Serpent. So yeah, the Steel Serpent reappears in the story. Davos is back, except he's working for the Crane Mother, who the show's renamed Madame Gao. And Orson does have 2 handguns that he can fire his chi through, but they don't really show off too much of that on the show until the very end. They show that the pistols still... Danny has the Iron Fist power back, and he can fire his chi through them. What happens is that eventually there is a fight in the City Hall subway station. Let me get back to this. There is a fight in the City Hall subway station, which has been abandoned in New York City for years, but they do a lot of filming there, so I think there's a very good chance that they'll bring things out there. But they'll probably replace Davos working for Hydra with Davos working for the Hand, just because they decided to mix that up with bringing the Hand into the Daredevil mythology. And here's a good picture of Orson unmasked. And during that fight in the City Hall subway station, there are things like ghost trains in here. What happens is that Davos eventually kills Orson. He does not survive any longer than 6 issues before kicking the bucket. And then the next issue has Wu Shi, who's the pirate queen of Pinghai Bay, who got mentioned in season 2 as somebody who Colleen and her father are descended from, which is going to be, I think that's a good hint that we'll meet Colleen's dad, and that Lee Wing is going to show up in season 3. But that she doesn't have any connection to Wu Shi in the comics. Wu is simply just another Iron Fist, so that part is a little bit different. And there's some throwbacks to old pulp adventures in Golden Age comics with Orson back in the 1930s, where it shows off stuff like a lot of Iron Fist's main influences when he was created were characters like Doc Savage and the book Lost Horizon. And a lot of that old pulp material really went on to influence Iron Fist. It also went on to influence things like Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones. But Iron Fist, for people out there who aren't familiar, actually predates Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider by a good long time, since Iron Fist debuted in the 1970s. There's Orson Randall in the Green Mist of Death, since they tell more of his story through flashbacks even after he dies. And really make sure that he has a very small role in the comics, but he has a very big impact. Now what happens is that there's the 7 Capital Cities of Heaven story, where Danny returns to Kunlun. And once he's returned to Kunlun, which will likely be, I think, a season 4, once he returns there, he meets the other immortal weapons. We saw the Bride of Nine Spiders in season 1. I'm not sure if she'll be recast or not. But if she isn't recast, then she'll probably make a return. If she is, she'll still return anyway. Then here is the Immortal Iron Fist by Dwayne Swierczynski, which is volume 2. Where the first story is called The Mortal Iron Fist, where we meet Cho Chang for the first time. Here he is. He can basically has a demon in him that can burst out at times. And like this. Which was not shown on the show. On the show, he's simply shown as a drunken boxer who's holding something in. They're not showing if that's what he's holding in. I'm not sure if they're going to go that far, because that would be pretty effects heavy. And I'm not sure if that would be doable on live action for that reason. Since when doing live action adaptations, you have to keep cost in mind. I always thought that Colleen is a pretty cool character. Misty's a pretty cool character. They've always been like really good supporting characters, but you also meet characters during the Immortal Iron Fist run like Sparrow, who I think is pretty cool. And then the last story is not as strong of an arc. It's Return to the 8th City, where Danny Rand Escape from the 8th City, where Danny Rand discovers that there is an 8th city, encounters the first Iron Fist, and gets trapped in there and has to do battle with demons and other creatures, but it's not as exciting as you'd think. It's more of an epilogue that just, like, manages to tie up loose ends. And then you've got the Immortal Weapons miniseries in here, which was written by different creators, and I think in some ways it badly butchers Chinese mythology, but Thor also badly butchers Norse mythology. And in both ways, I think that liberties are certainly taken in ways that I think are kind of insensitive, even though I like Iron Fist and I like Thor. And I think they're both great series. Then you got, like, Iron Fist has, like, one last little epilogue called Caretakers. But it's not necessarily the most important thing, and yeah, they kind of ruin his face on here. The art isn't particularly nice. It kind of makes Danny ugly. Cho Chang is a character out there who hunts every Iron Fist, so I hope that Louis Tan will make a return in Season 3. Because where I'm guessing that they're headed with Season 3, I think would be the last Iron Fist story, which is the Orson Randall material, and the Mortal Iron Fist, which is the Cho Chang material. That's where it looks like it's headed. I think we'll also see some stuff with Colleen and her dad, because I think that her mother's been dead both in the TV show and in the comics for a long time, but in the comics her mother was also tied to the hand. And I think that seeing some of those ties pop up, I think would be pretty interesting. I think that I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming, assuming that the ratings are there. If it gets good enough ratings to be renewed, then I think it'll get a Season 3, and I'm hoping that people now know which Iron Fist stories to read for Iron Fist seasons 1 and 2. A lot of the other material hasn't really been adapted. It isn't particularly important to the show. Season 2 was I think a big step up from season 1, and it's definitely based on the what's it called? The Claremont and Byrne run, which I thought was some very strong material. And hopefully, when people get around to checking things out, they'll like it. And for the record, what they do with Iron Fist, or what they do with Colleen Wing in season 2 of Iron Fist, that never happened in the comics. That's something completely original in the show, and I think it opens up some really interesting possibilities, because I always felt that Colleen was kind of weak link in the chain with the Defenders. Like, Misty's got the arm, Luke's practically invincible, Jessica has jumping and gliding powers, Daredevil has radar sense, Danny's got the Iron Fist, and then Colleen just kind of feels there, but they managed to address that in season 2, and they did it in a really smart way, and in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. And hopefully we'll see something interesting done with her in the future. And yeah, those are the Iron Fist stories I recommend. There are some stories which come later, but they don't necessarily impact continuity all that much. I'll probably be showing off where to get started with Venom next. In particular, I'm not going to be showing off a lot of actual Venom comics, because if you want to start reading Venom, you have to get started with Spider-Man. And that will be my next episode. Catch you then.